hear us or see us? Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
We really took some thought there. I was getting worried about my internet. So welcome everyone. Welcome, Philip.
Hello,
today we're going to be discussing American Gods, which is the shelf space pick for the month of November by Neil Gaiman. So we will start off spoiler free and then move into spoilers. I don't know if Philip, you want to just say a word about yourself?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I'm a booktuber who focuses on fantasy, and I really enjoy these discussion formats a lot. It's my favorite thing to do. I've been in some group collaborations with Abby in the past on John Gwynn's books. Really had a great time with that. I think we did, right, Abby?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I'm just really happy to be here and to be discussing American Gods, which is an old favorite of mine, actually.
And thank you so much for filling in to discuss this. I know that you have taught American Gods, so I feel like you're going to have some very interesting and probably more complex thoughts than I have had on it.
I wouldn't guarantee that, but I will do my best. And I really think that the great thing about these discussions is we always learn from each other, right? So
definitely.
I'm anticipating that you will shed light on this book for me as well.
So how many times have you read the book?
You know, I was actually trying to think about that, and I believe it's 4 or 5 times that I've actually read the book. It's been a few years since I've read it, but I have read it 4 or 5 times. Yeah.
And have you read, because I was reading the introduction of my book, and it says that there's the preferred text and then there's the original text. Have you read both? Or?
Yes, I have read I think it's 12,000 additional words that they released with the 10th anniversary edition. Hello, Tracy. Hello, Alan. Oh, you're on the interstate. Okay. Yes, for several reasons. Alan, Long Price Quartet, I'm reading, and I will be reading Books of Babel, so that's all Alan's fault. But anyway, yeah. So there is a 10th anniversary edition, which has 12,000 additional words, just bits and pieces here and there. There's one chunk, particularly that's near the end of the book. We're not doing spoilers now, so I won't say specifically what that is, but I've read those, and I don't think it's a big deal whether you read the which is what I have here, the original edition, or the extended version, or the author's preferred edition, or whatever you call it. The 12,000 words are fun and they're cool and they're interesting, but I don't think that you should worry too much if you have the older edition, because you're not missing anything central, really. There's a few interesting scenes that are elaborated on. Did you have the one with
mine's the extended edition?
Okay, cool. Yeah.
So because I don't have anything to compare it to, that's why I was curious, because having not read the original, to know what the differences are. I just found that a very interesting introduction when I read the book, and I went, oh, there's differences.
Yeah. I don't think they're too substantive, honestly. Just curious. They're more curiosities, and perhaps a little bit of reinforcing some of those themes, which we're going to talk about in the non-spoiler part. But
I don't really know that many other books that are like that, where there is these different versions in so much of this extent. Because it's quite 12,000 words, you said. It's quite a hefty number.
Yeah, I mean, that is something. It's something you see more in films, I think, these days, with the director's cut or the extended edition or that sort of thing, which doesn't surprise me at all. Neil Gaiman being also very involved in films, and so it doesn't surprise me that he would have something like that.
That is true. There are a few.
Yeah. Okay. The Stand. Yeah. Cool. Hello, Safina.
Hello. And so, what have you rated it?
You mean like stars?
We're doing a out of 5.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean, I don't do stars or rate because I'm a professor and I have to grade people all the time. So I don't like
this book does not get an A or a C or.
Yeah, no, I'm not into the stars so much, and I honestly don't feel like. No offense to anyone who does this, because I think it's fine. It's a shorthand, really, for people. And
Yeah,
if
yeah.
I know Abby's taste, and I see that she's given a book a 3 stars or a 4-star, whatever, then it's helpful to me. But I don't think a star other than that says enough. I prefer to just talk about the book and what I
Oh,
like and what I think is interesting and that sort of thing. But if I had to give it stars, I would give it a 5-star. I mean, it's a for me anyway, and it is a book that is very, as you said, it's theme driven. It's not conventional. So a lot of people, when they first read this, feel a bit lost because it doesn't follow all the rules. It's not a straightforward narrative. There are all these interludes, and it is part road trip. It is part mystery. It is part fantasy. It is part unconventional hero's journey. There's all these things all mushed together in this very interesting book. And so I think it throws a lot of people at first because of that. And I think the protagonist, Shadow Moon, is also a bit maybe one reason why, and we'll talk about that later when we do the spoilers, why some people are a bit thrown at first. So instead of F's, 1 star, give my students a 1-star rating. Yeah, they might scratch their heads a bit about that, but yeah. So
anyone that has read it, if you do star ratings, then please share your thoughts. If you loved it, didn't like it, if you were so on it. I personally gave it 4 stars.
Okay.
So there were lots of elements that I really liked, but there was a few elements that I didn't quite connect with.
Right.
And I think that's predominantly because I do love characters, and as a character-driven reader, I didn't personally connect to Shadow as our main protagonist. So I had this sort of disconnect from him.
Yeah.
And maybe because we're very different people.
Yeah. I would just say that that's intentional, and I won't say more than that now. But we'll circle back to that, I hope, when we do spoilers, because I think that your reaction is very, very it's common. When I teach this to my students, and by the way, this is a book that teaches really, really well because it is so deep thematically and so rich. But a lot of my students, exactly the reaction you're talking about, as far as the feeling of a lack of connection to the protagonist. But I would say that Gaiman does that on purpose. So we'll talk about that later, I think.
4 stars from Alan. The 5-star Strumpet.
Oh yeah, the 5-star Strumpet gave it only 4. Okay.
On the TBR.
Yeah. I bet you'll like it, Tracy. I think you will. I suspect that you would actually like this book because
it sat on my TBR for a very long time as well. So
yeah. Well,
to read it.
As far as characters go, too, and just in a non-spoiler way, I can say that yes, the main protagonist is a bit of a blank slate in some ways, but a lot of the other characters, that is, are actually quite vivid to me. And I think Gaiman is a master of dialogue, and he's a master of characterization through dialogue. So the character Wednesday, for example, very interesting character. And I think his when you turn, it's a bit like reading Joe Abercrombie, because when you turn to the page and you can see some dialogue, you'll know who that is talking. You know, oh, that's Wednesday, or that's whatever, Mr. Nancy, or that's the leprechaun guy, Mad Sweeney. I feel like he's very skilled. Actually, he's a writer I admire deeply in terms of his prose in general, but I think he's particularly skilled at dialogue.
Yes. I was wondering about him as an author, because I believe he's British.
Yes.
And this is a very American book. And I cannot judge how well he does America, having not being American. So how is that, as an American, reading a British person's take on it?
Well, it's really cool, actually, because he actually did live. I don't know if he's still living in. I don't think so, but he lived in the United States for a long time. So it's a country that I think he knows well, but always, I think, looking at it from the perspective of an outsider, which is interesting to me. And that is also I don't think this is very spoilery to say, but Shadow is a similar kind of thing. He is a bit of an outsider in some ways. And so I find that to be helpful because it's hard for us looking from ourselves. We're inside the box. So it's hard to know what it looks like from the outside. So to have an outsider's perspective can be very valuable. And I would say that he gets a lot of things right. One of the interesting lines in there is from, I think it's Wednesday, who says it. This is the only country in the world that worries about what it is. And it's an interesting observation. I'm sure it's not entirely true, but it does seem that we here in the United States are very, we spend a lot of time thinking about what we are as a nation, partly because of our immigrant history. And that is something that is very central to American Gods. So the idea of identity, of national identity and cultural identity and personal identity are all central to this, because you have a sort of, like I said, an unconventional hero's journey. A lot of it is Shadow figuring out who he is, but a lot of it is figuring out what America is. And it's called American Gods for a reason. So this is a book that is very much about American identity and what we are and our history and how all that informs, how we think of ourselves. So I like that. And maybe that's an easier thing to do for an observant outsider. There's a history of books written about our country by people from the outside. I think of Tocqueville, for example, and others writing about this country as a kind of with a mixture, I think, of fascination and horror, perhaps. So I appreciate it. I enjoy it a lot.
That's good to know, because I found it accessible as a non-American person, that I didn't feel like I couldn't imagine the places. I felt like what I would imagine America to be like, but it wasn't so far into I have no idea what these places look like. For example, I read The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin.
Oh,
and
yes.
That is very New York. And having never been to New York, I was like, I just can't picture it because it's just too New York for me.
Yeah.
Whereas I didn't have that sort of struggle so much with this, maybe because of how broad it is of America, that it's not just focused on one place. It is a road trip where there is lots of different parts of America that are traveled through.
Yeah, that's a great observation, because you do have tiny glimpses of New York, but it's mostly small town America. It's lakeside. It's these little towns and these off the road places and the roadside attractions, and it's Americana, but it's not so much focused on just New York City. I happen to live near New York City, so it's a city that I know pretty well. So even though I love N.K. Jemisin's Broken Earth trilogy, I haven't yet read The City We Became, and that's definitely on my list, though.
I think that's one of those books where if you know New York, you will probably love it. And you'll probably really enjoy seeing the places that you know within the book. Whereas as someone who has never been there, it was a bit of a struggle, because I was like, well, this could be, I don't know what to imagine here.
Yeah.
But that's a very different book.
Yeah. So you're right, though. American Gods is much broader in scope. And it goes all over the place. So again, it's not really a spoiler, but you're in Las Vegas, you're a little bit in New York, but you're in all these small towns, and you're in all over the place. So it's just that kind of apple pie baseball and Americana kind of thing. But mixed in with all these interludes that give you an historical sense of the nation as well, and from a multitude of perspectives. Then that's very important. The diversity of this book. It's called American Gods, plural, because it is all the different infusions from all over the world, the different places that are part of this nation. And so that's very, very important, I think.
And I really liked the interludes.
Yeah.
I really, really liked them, surprisingly, because it can be a bit hit and miss with interludes, especially when you're really enjoying a story and suddenly you're like, oh, it's got to be broken up by this. But I actually really, really liked them. I really liked seeing the history of the gods and where they came from, and sort of that take on identity that it explores with them, and the identity, I guess, is a theme going forward and a theme for America, and the identities of these different immigrants that have come to America and the sort of the past and the present for the gods.
Yeah.
And the future for them as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so interesting how I guess a lot of our identity is centered around what we worship, right? So who we are, you can learn a lot about yourself from what you worship. And in the case of the olden days, there were these gods and people brought those gods over here. And how were these gods transformed as a result of being in this country? Because American God, the American version of, say, Odin is not going to be the same as it would have been back in Norway or in Iceland, or the American version of Kali is not going to be the same as it was back in India or Nepal. So you have the American gods, and they are part what people have brought here, the cultural traditions that they brought, but they're also a product of this country, which is, and many times it's said in the book, it's not a place that's very kind to gods, is it? Because we're so fickle, because things change so rapidly here. So we have more modern gods now, right? The gods of the modern age, the internet and
the TV, the highway,
the television, the screens, the stock market, the men in black. We have all these different gods now that have taken over our minds in ways that these are now our ways, our filters, our lenses for making sense of the world, instead of these old gods which used to explain everything to us and to which we turned for so many things, solace and for explanations of the world around us and for protection and all that. So now we turn to technology and we turn to social media and so many other things. So it's a fascinating study in human identity as well.
Yeah. And as well, thinking about identity and what it means to be of that diaspora, and what happens to you if you start losing that element of your identity, and how our identity can be made up of different facets. So you're not just worshipping one god, at least we aren't anymore. Maybe originally people from that area would have worshipped that one god, but now we have a variety of things, especially if you're looking at these modern gods now that are the television and social media. It's not as though one person worships the television now. I mean, right. Maybe some people do. Maybe we're worshipping the god of books.
We're probably coming pretty close to that. But that's a great point, though, Abby, because I think you're so right. Our identities are a product of so many different facets, and we might be in tune with one or more of those facets at any given time, but there's usually much more to it, and that is something that is also captured in here. The complexity of that is something that I think Gaiman is very sensitive to in here. So, and he has a lot of fun with it. So yeah, it's interesting because Gaiman does have allusions to various religions and mythologies, and it's always a tricky thing whether you're calling something a mythology or a religion. For example, the Hindu gods, it's a living, breathing religion, right? It's not a mythology. When we say mythology, we usually talk about something in the past. The Hindu gods, Kali and Shiva and all those, that's a living religion. And there are, it's interesting because in the extended version that we talked about in the beginning, there are some references to Christianity as well, and to Jesus specifically. And it's not one of those. He appears here, but there's an extended scene in which he appears in the longer version. But some of them are mythologies as well. And the most important, I think, and Abby, you probably would agree, is the Old Norse, because there's a lot he does with Old Norse in there. And I can't say too much beyond that because it would venture into spoilers, but the most important mythology that Gaiman is dealing with in American Gods, I'd say overall, is the Old Norse. Yeah. Although there's lots of other stuff in there, plenty of other stuff.
Yeah. How would you compare it to? Have you read many other Neil Gaiman books?
I have read The Ocean at the End of the Lane, and I love that book. It's a different book from American Gods, much smaller, much more focused, very dreamlike book, and not much more by Gaiman. I saw the film. What was it? Coraline. With my daughter when she was little and got
Bit
kind of
creepy.
freaked out. Yeah. So yeah, and Stardust as well. Yeah. So yeah, he's such a lot of his stuff is just very different. I'm sure there's a sort of a Neil Gaiman stamp on all these things, like the Sandman and everything else. But he likes to obviously try different things, I think. So he's somebody it's hard to pin down, I think, in some ways. What have you read by him?
Those are the three that I have read, but I read them quite a few years ago. And I own Neverwhere, but I haven't read it yet. But I was thinking about that whilst reading this, although it's been many years since I read those three books, trying to figure out the writing style and how it compared to those, because it does have some of the whimsical-esque side to it.
Yeah.
And some of the sort of reality, not reality, dreamlike quality to it. But it was also quite different as well, particularly as I guess this is a fantasy but set in a more real world setting compared to Stardust, or I guess The Ocean at the End of the Lane is more a real world setting, but they are quite different.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I guess someone could describe American Gods as urban fantasy, but even then, I still don't think it captures what's going on here. There are just so many different things, disparate things that go into this. And if you read some of those older road trip novels, that's there. If it's got a mystery in it. Again, we can't say anything about that yet, but there's obviously there's a fantasy mythological element to it. And as I said before, there is a hero's journey as well. It's a very unconventional hero's journey, though.
When I was reading it, I got to the midway point and I was like, I wonder where this is going.
Yeah.
That it didn't feel, at least for the first half when it was setting everything up, I was like, I wonder what the direction is. And then it does all start to have more of a direction. I think my enjoyment of it increased as the book went on. In the beginning, I was a bit tentative. I was a bit unsure. And then as things went on, I was like, okay, I get where we're going. I get where we're going, but I can see the direction.
Plot wise, I totally see what you mean. I think what he's doing with those interludes too, though, which might seem like interruptions of the plot at first, but they're important because they are telling you thematically what this book is about, what's the heart of this book, and how this is a country that is a country of immigrants. It is a country of people who came here, some voluntarily, some not voluntarily. It's a country that has a history that is full of tragedy, and so that's important in terms of wrestling with the identity part of this. I think to say that we are a nation that's still trying to figure itself out because of this history, and he gives us all these glimpses into that. And some of the interludes actually do, if you blink, you might miss it, but some of them actually do have repercussions in the main plot as well. Some of them are just sort of outside the main plot. There's a historical in nature. But if you're hawk-eyed, you might notice certain things that happen that are related to some of those interludes as well. So
yes. So do you want to start moving into more spoilery territory?
I think it's time.
So hopefully, if you've not read it, then we've sold it to you to read it.
Yeah.
And this will be your time to disappear off and read the book and then come back once you've read it.
Yeah. But thank you for watching thus far. And if you do go out and read it, I hope you will enjoy it tremendously.
Yes, absolutely. So moving along to the spoilery side. Where do you want to start?
Oh, wow. There are so many. I mean, we can take it in threads, maybe. Well, let's start with Shadow, I guess, right? Because he's the central protagonist. And, we meet him when he's in prison. And with his, we learn that he has this cellmate called Loki, Smith. And he's pretty down and out, pretty fairly depressed kind of character, but looking forward to, of course, going home. He's about to leave, but there's this sense of doom, this dread hanging over him, right? And quickly we learn that he's about to learn of a terrible tragedy, that not only did his wife die in a car accident, but that she was having an affair with his best friend. And that's where she died, with him in the car.
It's a bit of a traumatic start to the book for him.
Yeah.
And I think that might have been where I sort of struggled a little bit with him, because he had quite a disconnected response to that situation.
Exactly.
We never really saw him break down or really get affected by it. He had
Go ahead.
a cold-ish reaction to it.
Yep.
And I sort of wanted him to have a bit more feeling.
Yeah. You're absolutely right. And that's part of who he is, part of him not knowing who he is. We do get some reactions later on, like when he's staying with Mr. Ibis and Mr. Jackal, and he is staring in the mirror, about to shave, and he's really coming close to slitting his throat. So sometimes with trauma like that, you can be numb. You can be in shock for a while. And I think that's a big part of who Shadow is through a lot of the story. Is he's somebody who's been traumatized, not only by this horrible loss and betrayal. It's a double whammy, really.
Yeah.
But as we learn more and more about his past, about the fact that he is an orphan. Okay, we can start with that. I mean, he doesn't know who his father was for most of the story, and his mother died when he was pretty young, when he was, I guess, a young teen. So this leaves him adrift. This leaves him as somebody kind of trying to figure himself out. And on top of that, he grew up outside the United States primarily because his mother worked for the State Department. He didn't grow up feeling comfortable here, right? He's a bit of an outsider in that respect. And on top of that, he's mixed race. His mother is African American, from the United States, a Black woman, but he's obviously probably, he's not sure who he is. It's an question that comes up, like, what are you? And he's like, I don't know. He's asked, are you Native American? Are you, so it's interesting how identity-less this guy is,
And I think that's even represented in his name, because I was thinking about the name Shadow. And I was like, well, is he a shadow of what? A shadow of a person? A shadow of America? And we don't ever really find out his real name.
Right. Well,
so then I'm going, well, what is his name? Because we just know him by Shadow.
Yeah. That's so true. Now, it's interesting because of who he actually is. This is a massive spoiler. But we're in the spoiler part. So there are hints early on, such as Wednesday's interest in Shadow. That's a hint. There are other hints, such as when Shadow makes it snow, and he's not sure if he does or not, but he makes it snow by thinking snow, right? He is not an ordinary human being. When we find out who his father is later on, that it is in fact Wednesday / Odin, a lot of things fall into place. But beyond that, even, he is a specific Norse god. He is, in fact, an embodiment, an American version, I guess, of Balder, from Norse mythology, which
Odin's son.
Odin's son, exactly. And a very interesting, I think it's a fascinating thing that Neil Gaiman is doing here, because of Shadow is not Balder, he's the American version of Balder, but he doesn't know that.
I was wondering if he was like the god of the American dream.
That's a cool that's a cool question, I think.
Because the American dream is people immigrants going over to America, seeking a dream, that they were trying to find a new home. They were, and he is like that. He is he is American, but he's not American. And he has these desires to create a life for himself, but he just doesn't quite know what that is. there's a point in the book where his dead wife says, you're dead. And he's like, but I'm not. But is that trying to find a life for himself?
Yeah, it's like he's an empty vessel, right?
A shadow.
Trying to figure out who he is. So that's a lot to do with, he is supposed to be kind of bland in that sense. But it's interesting when you look at who Balder was in Norse mythology. He's the god of light. He's the god of goodness. He's the god that everybody loves. And Shadow has that quality. People,
that's why everyone wants him on their side.
Yeah. And when you look at the most famous, I think, story in Old Norse about Balder is the story of his death, actually, which is I'll try to be brief here, but it's told in Snorri's prose Edda. And it's basically Balder has a dream that he's going to die. And he tells his mother about it. His mother is Frigg, and the wife of Odin. And so Frigg is very distressed about this. And she basically goes around getting everything in the world to agree not to harm Balder. So because everybody loves Balder, everybody agrees to do this. Nobody's going to harm Balder. So what do the gods do? Well, being the Norse gods, they decide to have a bit of fun with this, and they play a game where they just throw spears and rocks and everything at Balder, and everything just bounces off. Nothing hurts him because everything has sworn not to hurt Balder. Well, who gets pissed off about this? Loki, of course. He just, this will not do for Loki, and so he disguises himself as a woman, goes to Frigg and says, hey, did everything agree not to hurt Balder? And she says, well, there was this plant, the mistletoe. I thought it was just too young to bother asking. And Loki's, oh, okay. And he leaves, goes to where the gods are tossing stuff. He gets a bit of a mistletoe. He gets a sprig of mistletoe. Goes to where the gods are playing their game, tossing stuff at Balder. There's probably some mead involved in that as well, But there's one god who's not participating, and that's Holder. He's the blind god, he's referred to. And he can't see, so he's not throwing anything at Balder. But he's immensely strong. But so Loki goes up to him and says, why aren't you playing the game? And he's like, well, I can't see, and I don't have anything to throw at him. And Loki says, here, let me help you out, old buddy. And he puts the mistletoe in Holder's hand and directs it toward Balder. Holder throws the mistletoe, and it pierces Balder like a spear and kills him. And then everybody's shocked and just deeply upset. And of course, Balder has to go to Hell, the place which is ruled by the figure Hel, right? The woman who's half corpse and half beautiful woman. So he goes to Hell, and everybody's really upset. So they decide to petition Hel to release Balder. And Hel says, okay, I'll release him if everything in creation weeps for Balder. And so everybody weeps except one old giantess who is, again, probably Loki in disguise. And interestingly, this is the event that sort of is the catalyst eventually for Ragnarok. It's a lot of stuff that happens in between, but it is one of the things that brings it about. And at the end of times, though, Balder and Holder both will come back, because Holder is slain for his role in killing Balder, but they will both be back after Ragnarok. So that's the most famous story of Balder, but you can see elements of him being a sacrificial figure here.
Yeah.
You can see elements of him being almost and some people think there might be some influence of Christianity in the portrayal of Balder, but he is a sacrificial figure who is a figure of light and goodness, and is taken from us with the promise of eventual return. And so Shadow is in some ways a sacrificial figure. He's the one who does when Odin dies, he has agreed to do this vigil for Odin, not knowing that he's his father even at that point. Of course, he's being used by Odin, and as it turns out, Loki, in this very elaborate two-man con, right? Which we need to talk about.
I didn't click about the Loki thing. I think because I was reading it physically. Maybe if I'd had the audiobook, I would have clicked a lot sooner about the Loki thing. But just reading it with my eyes, then when I got to it, I was like, oh, I should have got that.
Low-key, liesmith, Loki lies, the one who makes lies, and he's this chaotic figure, the trickster who delights in chaos, and that's what he's getting out of it. Yeah, I agree with that. Gaiman basically retells a lot of the stories that you'd find in the Snorri's prose Edda, and he tells them in a way that's very accessible. So I think it's a great way to start to get to know Norse mythology, is to read Gaiman's retelling, I guess, of some of those old Norse stories. Yeah,
because I don't know a lot about Norse mythology, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, in my opinion, the best thing to do is read the originals, and of course, in Old Norse, if you can, that's the best. But there are some good translations of the prose Edda and the poetic Edda as well. If it's something you're interested in. But I think the Gaiman's book on Norse mythology is actually a great introduction. He includes a lot of the prominent stories there, I think, including the one I just told about Baldur, I think. But that's an important one for him, obviously, because he made Baldur the central figure, at least the American version of Baldur in American Gods. Yeah.
But yes, I think his character is one where I didn't connect with it in the beginning, but as you said, you're not meant to, really. Right. He is not necessarily a persona, but like he has a role as a character. And you see that at the end. You see his role in the way that you talk about his thematic role as a character and identity. And he's not someone that you necessarily connect to. Which is an interesting thing, because when you look at characters, and maybe it is more of a modern reader thing, that we like to connect to our characters, whether you're connecting to them and hating them or connecting with them because you relate to them. And I think that's more of a modern fantasy thing as opposed to more older texts. In older texts, it wasn't so much a connection to a character that would drive you to keep reading that book. So I think it is more of a personal thing that I like to feel like I can understand a character.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of readers of modern genre fiction are, and there's nothing wrong with that either, are very character oriented, and they enjoy vivid characters that pop out of the page and that have strong personalities. And that's not Shadow. Shadow is very understated. Although he's big and strong, you don't see him use that a lot. He's very gentle. And so he's just also, like I said, in some ways, a blank slate, because he doesn't know who he is because of his own personal history, but also because of his sort of mythological history, I guess. So that's an interesting aspect. Gaiman does do he has a couple novellas or short stories that follow American Gods that are with Shadow. And I think I've heard that before, at least. I don't know if he still intends to, but there might be an American Gods 2 at some point. So, so that's a very, it's a character that I appreciate more and more every time I read the book and in retrospect. Because a lot of times in the hero's journey, it is about figuring out who you are. That's a big part of this psychological journey, because of the orphan thing, right? It's so common to have an orphan at the beginning of a hero's journey, and part of the quest is figuring out who you are. In this case, it's also figuring out what America is in the process. But there are certain key moments along the way. Oh, that's a great question. The role of the new gods. Abby, do you want to talk about that first?
Well, I think it's how our what we worship has changed, that we're no longer worshipping these older gods or these religions that histories and our past has worshipped, although some people still do. It's what our society now values, and that our values, or some people's values, have now shifted into focusing on technology and social media and what our future looks like and how fickle we are now, because these old gods have been around for generations, and that they are, I guess, pillars of society. Right. Whereas I wonder if in a few hundred years' time, if the TV would be a pillar of society. And I don't know if it would. I think there would be new things that would have come along and replaced it in 300 years' time. Whereas we probably will still have the older pillars of society, like Odin and Loki, that those will maintain. So I guess it's looking at our identity of those and those new gods, and whether they're just a product of the time now, or what their longevity is. And if there are going to be any new gods or new American gods that are going to have longevity into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you just said. And plot-wise, of course, the new gods are, in a way, they're a sort of they're the false enemy that's being set up here by Odin and Loki, because they're manipulating everybody here. Because Loki is posing as Mr. World, who is supposedly leading the new gods in this war against the old gods, but Odin and Loki are sort of fanning the flames all along as a way to get a sacrifice for themselves, because the old gods have been neglected. They've been sort of pushed aside, and they're becoming less and less. The worship is gone. They're having to find creative ways to get their worship. And so this whole one of the central plot of the whole thing is this two-man con, where they're orchestrating this war between the old and the new gods. And it turns out that it's going to be a sacrifice to Odin to basically get his juices flowing again. But also Loki likes the chaos. He feeds off the chaos. So that's his stake in this as well. So on just on the plot level, that's what they're there for. The new gods are kind of being set up as the villains here, but they're in many ways, yes, they're different because they're modern, but in some ways they're like the old gods too, aren't they? So
I mean, they thrive off the same things. It's worship and people worshipping them. But I do think it was well plotted, that execution at the ending, where you figure out that it is Odin and Loki, and they have been behind it the whole time. And that's very, from what I know of Norse mythology and their personalities, it's very much their personalities. And so when it all came into place, I was like, well, obviously, why didn't I see any of this all coming?
Yeah, it sort of all fits together in the end. Even little details like the tree, the branch from the world tree that Mr. Town is supposed to deliver to Loki. Loki was going to throw that over the battle. And that's an Old Norse thing. The Vikings would take a spear and throw it over their enemy as they were about to engage in battle, and dedicate the slaying to Odin. Right. So that's what he's riffing off there. Of course, Laura puts that branch to a very different use, doesn't she? She and Shadow kind of foil the thing at the end, don't they?
Yeah, and I was very happy about that. I was like, oh yes. The plans, the double con has all gone wrong, and
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I do like how you have this theme throughout about the con and the tricks and the money, the sleight of hand, and so it does. I didn't get it, and I wonder if other people saw it coming or not, where they do all these different tricks, and actually and part of me was suspicious, but I wasn't. I was going, I'm suspicious, but I don't know why I'm suspicious or where the suspicion is going to end up at. So then when we end up with the realization that there is a much bigger picture here, and is Mr. World and Wednesday working together to manipulate everyone.
And Wednesday tells Shadow, at a certain point, he's telling him about these different cons that he did. And there's a point where he tells him about this con that he did. And Shadow says, yeah, but wouldn't you need two people for that? And Wednesday's, yeah, that's a two-man con. And we're in the midst of a two-man con here. There's a certain amount of deflection going on. And Shadow's being manipulated. He's being exploited and used by the two of them. It goes way back. Even his birth was planned by Wednesday. His being in prison, planned by Wednesday. The death of Laura, planned by Wednesday and Loki. So poor Shadow has been manipulated into this all along as a sacrificial lamb of a sort. Again, very deliberate, I think, reverberations of the Balder figure, but also, the Christ figure, the sacrificial lamb, So obviously slightly different connotations, but nevertheless, I think a similar theme going on there.
Yeah. And I did find it interesting. I think there was a note at the end of my book, which was saying how when Gaiman was coming up with these different cons, and that actually someone imitated his con idea with the bank, and then he got an email from someone saying, someone has taken your book a bit too literally and has been inspired to do your cons that you or reenact them.
And obviously that someone got caught, I would assume.
I would assume. But yeah, I found that quite funny. I was like, well, funny in a bad way.
Yeah. Well, not everybody is Wednesday to pull off something like that. Most of us lack his charm, I would say, right?
Yeah. Yes. So the other plot thread is the murder mystery going on.
Yeah.
And I felt quite invested in that mystery and trying to figure out what was going on with those children, because you could see that it was a historic that had been going on for many years. As soon as they mentioned that every year a child disappeared, I was like, well, this is a recurring pattern. Right. And then I did start to think, well, if it's a recurring pattern that's been going on for that extended period of time, it's going to have to be an older character. Yeah. It's not going to be one of the younger people within the town. So it did sort of, in some ways, it was an obvious answer to who it was.
Yeah.
As soon as we're told the longevity of it or how long it's been.
Yeah, and there are hints to where Shadow sees in the old book a guy who looks, an old photograph of a man who looks just like Hinzelmann, right? You think, oh, this must be his grandfather or whatever, right? And Hinzelmann has all these old stories about back in the day and how cold it used to get and all that. And when it turns out that, like many of the other figures we meet here, he is an old world creature of myth. He's a kobold who had been worshipped as a god at one time. It's so interesting too. You get here the evolution of a god. You sort of piece together Hinzelmann's story. He was originally a child who was sacrificed by some Germanic tribe in a very, to us, very cruel, barbaric ritual, but became the god of that tribe. Became a figurehead and was worshipped. Eventually, with the coming of Christianity, it was demoted to a kobold, right? Which was brought here by German immigrants to the Midwest, to Wisconsin. And so, Hinzelmann was brought there, but eventually, of course, he became like all the other gods and figures, neglected because these beliefs and stories began to wane. So he had to find a way to
survive.
And it became this deal with the town of Lakeside, which is interesting because it does say something, I think, about the American dream. You talked about that before, right? Lakeside is the American dream. It's the perfect small American town, but at a price, right? There is a price to be paid here. And I feel like this, again, goes back to those interludes. When we talk about what we are and what we've become, we need to talk about the price as well. We need to talk about slavery. We need to talk about what happened to the Native Americans. We need to talk about the deals we made in order to forge this country. So, it's all part of what we are, So,
and I think those elements they were interwoven in a very good way. That it did tackle all these themes, the history of America, and the pain that it has been built on. And so seeing those different interviews and these stories, and I really liked that, or reading it.
And it's cool how it ultimately is linked to, the Lakeside narrative, with Shadow finally figuring out the mystery. Oh, it's Hinzelmann, and it's in the trunk. I wore my Ganesh shirt, so it's in the trunk, right? When Shadow he's on the world tree and being sacrificed essentially to Odin, he has all those visions, right? And one of them is Ganesh, and telling him it's in the trunk. And of course, you figure out, oh, it's in the trunk of the car, and the car that's put on the ice. That's where Hinzelmann, in this ritual that he has orchestrated every year as a sacrifice to himself. So ironic, because he was a child who was sacrificed, right?
Yeah.
In the first place. So there's a grisly kind of full circle element to this.
History repeating itself.
Yeah.
And I guess that's one of those things where, as a British person, trunk is it's a boot of a car for me.
Yeah, the boot. Yeah.
The extra step of, trunk, not like not the trunk of a tree or the trunk of an
Right.
elephant.
Don't you guys call it the dicky or something like that?
The boot.
You don't call it the dicky anymore? Is that old? I guess that's old. Okay.
I don't know, but
That's
no,
really old. Okay, so I'm very outdated with my British slang, obviously.
No, it's the boot of the car.
The boot. Okay, fine. So, but we call it the trunk, obviously. And there was a Gaiman, obviously living here in the States, knew very well that we call it the trunk, and he has that little bit of fun with Ganesh in Shadow's vision, during which he's on the World Tree. He's on Yggdrasil in Norse terms, but it's in, where was it? Georgia, I think. This old ash tree. Which is it's kind of cool how he's Americanized all these things. It's a lot of fun sometimes. It allows him to give us some surprises as well. So should we talk about Laura at all? Because I feel like she's a character who is often not well loved. But I think I actually, the more times I've read the book, the more I've sort of appreciated her journey. So I'm curious about your reaction to her.
I think she's a tricky one because you go in knowing, well, she's dead, but the circumstances of her death, in that she had been cheating on Shadow for such a long time. So that doesn't give us like this, it doesn't really draw me to her.
Yeah.
It doesn't make her very likable because of her past actions. But I think she does redeem herself as the book goes on. It is a redemption arc for her. That she loves Shadow. She loves him.
Yes.
And I think she regrets what she did. However much I don't like her in the beginning. But I think she definitely tries to redeem herself. She tries to do what she thinks is best, and she tries to help. And there are redeeming qualities to her. Definitely.
Yeah, I agree. I actually agree with you entirely there. And she's dead for most of the story. She's dead, right? So that definitely affects her personality. When she reacts to Shadow's pain, she's reacting as someone who is a little bit out of touch with emotions, right? So that scene in the hotel when she first is there, part of her, she's like, she wants to kiss Shadow. She feels some guilt, but there's also a lack of reaction, which we as readers find very disturbing and upsetting, because, hey, you just cheated on this guy, and he's been stabbed in the back, and all you can do is sit there and say, "Oh, that must hurt." I mean, it feels a little bit insulting almost. But then you follow her on this journey, and I think this is a sign of a great author. Where you follow her and she is trying. I mean, at first I think she's a bit selfish about it too. She's like, Shadow, find some way to make me alive, right? And she does protect him. There are moments there when she, for example, when Shadow is kidnapped by the Men in Black, she goes and rescues him, right? And they are connected by the coin that Shadow gives, Mad Sweeney's coin, which he accidentally gave to Shadow, which Shadow threw in her grave. And that's maybe the reason why Laura is able to walk around the way she does. But a lot of that is her learning to let go and Shadow learning to let go. And that somehow I found that scene at the end very touching, where she had stabbed herself, threw herself in order to stab Loki with that spear, as it became a spear from the branch from the World Tree. It was an act of self-sacrifice, and finally I think she understood when she asked Shadow, take the coin away from me, right?
Like, let me have peace. Let
me have peace. And you feel like she has learned from all of this. She's learned from this journey, that she's become a better person. I guess being dead can be good for you sometimes.
maybe. But yeah, no, I didn't have like a negative reaction towards her, really. I could see why people wouldn't like her.
Yeah, I mean, she does a kind of mean thing there. And she, on top of it, she's the reason why Shadow was in jail in the first place. Right? Because she's the one that sort of puts him up to participating in that robbery that goes kind of wrong. And they try to pin it all on Shadow, and he's the only one that goes to jail. And it's poor Shadow. And he won't say a word about her involvement in it. He protects her this whole time. But it
And
also that
I
helps
guess in
develop.
the end, she protects him.
Exactly right. So it's a little bit reversed, isn't it? In that sense. So I liked it. I like that element of it. But Wednesday for me is the most vivid character in there. What did you think of him?
He definitely has a personality.
Yeah.
I didn't like him particularly. That was my tricky thing. I was like, well, we're reading about Shadow and Wednesday, and these are meant to be the good guys because that's the perspective we're following. But I didn't like him. So that's why I was always like, I don't know if I want Shadow to be on Wednesday's team. I don't want him to be on the team of the new gods either. Right. I was like, I just want you to like go off by yourself, Shadow, and like do your own thing. Like be in your small town America and have your peace. Which I think hopefully that's what he gets in the end, that he has himself and he comes to peace with everything. But Wednesday, particularly his relationship towards women, young women, I was like, no, don't like this. I don't like this. And part of me wanted for Shadow to go, you shouldn't do that. Because Shadow could see that it was wrong. And Shadow was like questioning why he pursued such young women. Right. So that particular element, I was like, I don't like him. Can he just not do that? Which then does make you question, like, what side there isn't really a good and an evil in this.
No.
You're led to believe that the new gods are the evil, the bad side, but they're not. And I think you can really see that when you look at Wednesday as a character, that you know that he's not good.
Because gods, all of them are reflections of humanity, you know. And Wednesday's he's curious because he is based on Odin, who in Norse mythology is a trickster who does some dastardly things, including he sleeps with women, and he tricks people. He, as much as Loki is the chaotic trickster, he and Wednesday are partners in many Old Norse stories, where they get into all kinds of shenanigans. So that's definitely a reflection of the Old Norse character as well. But he is the American version. So he's kind of a bit of a hustler. He's a gambler. He's a con man in a very American way. Instead of having a patch over an eye, he has a glass eye, right? And he, because of the story where he gets his wisdom from, right? There are a couple of interesting stories there that are reflected in American Gods. One is that he leaves one eye at the well of Mimir, which is at the base of the world tree Yggdrasil, in exchange for wisdom. But the other story is where he hangs on the tree himself, the way that Shadow did, right? For 9 days and 9 nights in exchange for wisdom. And there's this wonderful poem called the Havamal. It's one of the poetic Edda poems, and it's where Wednesday recites all of his kind of wisdom. It's a bit of a showing off his wisdom, a gnomic poem of a sort. And this poem is repeated in American Gods when they're on the plane. Wednesday with Shadow, I think it's when they're on their way to Las Vegas. But anyway, at one point he recites the Havamal, and I mean, it's straight out of the Edda, so he is Odin, but he's also the American version of it. Yeah, the TV series. Did you watch the TV series?
I haven't watched it, no. So I can't really say how they've adapted it. Have you?
I saw the first season, and I liked the first season. And then I started the second season. I rented the DVDs from the library for this. And I started the second season, and I got a few episodes in, and I was bored to tears, honestly. By the second season, I thought it was tedious, and I did not like the second season at all, and I gave up. Actually, it's pretty rare for me to DNF something like that, but I gave up on the second season. Not that I'm a purist; I didn't need it to be just like the book or anything like that. It's just the directions they took it in for me. It didn't work, and I thought they got bogged down a lot. So it was just unfortunate to me because I love the book so much. And I know that Gaiman was involved at least in the first season, I think, of the show. I'm not sure about the second, but so yeah, for me, it was a miss, the TV show. Oh, we got another good question here. Oh, yes. Okay. Yeah. Oh, great question. So do you want to tackle that first, Abby?
Well, I'm probably one of those people that doesn't know that much about Indian mythology, religion, culture so much. And so maybe things did go over my head. It's hard to say as someone that I can't compare the two because I don't know what it's like to know loads about it. But yeah, I mean, I liked how there were gods from different mythologies, that it wasn't just the Norse mythology. There was the Indian mythology mixed in. There was the African mythology and the Irish mythology, that there was, you could see the vast array of different gods and cultures that were mixed in. I don't know, you know more about Indian mythology than I do, Philip.
I know a little bit about it because I've lived in South Asia, and it's a place that I love, and I love the religion there. Hinduism is so rich with stories, and as far as Gaiman's incorporation, though, it's like it's not as deep as the Old Norse incorporation. So he clearly, I don't think Gaiman knows as much about the Hindu gods as he does about the Old Norse ones. So what you have is a fairly superficial inclusion of, mainly it's Kali, who is called Mamaji, the American version of Kali. And it's interesting because there's a point where Mamaji remarks that I'm doing pretty well, especially, back in India, Kali is still worshipped. She's doing very well. She's unlike a lot of these sad American gods, like Wednesday and others who are trying to figure out creative ways to get worship and to survive. She's actually doing pretty well, especially back in South Asia. But even here, because of immigrants, Kali is worshipped. And Ganesh is worshipped. So, but their scenes are pretty short. Kali is, of course, a kind of war goddess. You don't want to mess with Kali, right? I mean, she's got all those arms and the tongue, and she's got weapons, and some of them in severed heads in other hands, and you don't mess with Kali, and so she is duped, along with all of the other gods, by Wednesday and Loki into participating in this war. And so her role is pretty much to be, first of all, her interaction with Shadow is kind of fun. But then when she's gearing up for war, she's also very frightening. So you do see that aspect of her. And Ganesh only appears, I think, in Shadow's vision, in his dream. And that was partly, I think, because Gaiman could work in the trunk pun. But he does impart some wisdom. I mean, that's a key moment, that Ganesh is the one enduring that vision, which is primarily Old Norse, but it involves Christianity and many other things. Ganesh is the one that gives him a key clue about the mystery going on in Lakeside. So, yeah. So I think what Gaiman is doing is interesting, and I think it's respectful. I don't get the feeling, like some people might think, well, could this be offensive to anyone who's a practitioner of this particular religion or anything like that? I don't think so. I think what he's trying to do is explore how myths and religion are such an important part of our identity and what we are, what we worship, and all that.
I would agree. I thought it was a respectful use of tackling all of those different identities, all those different religions and gods for the purpose of the story. I mean, I'm not overly religious, so it isn't for me to say that I thought the representation was good of Ganesh or any of them, but I thought they were interwoven in a respectful way.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, Great. Well, it's a fun book. It's a vivid book with some great characters. I love Wednesday. I mean, I don't love him. I would hate to actually meet the guy.
I think that's the thing with certain characters, that you can see that they're really interesting characters and you can like reading from them, but you wouldn't want to ever interact with them in person.
Maybe share a drink with him if I can get away from it unscathed, without being manipulated.
Maybe buy your own drink.
Yeah. I wouldn't want any of his mead, that's for sure. And no deals with him. No.
Maybe a soft drink as well. I think
probably
alcohol might be a bit dangerous.
Yeah, that's probably good advice. If you ever meet Wednesday, stick to Coca-Cola or something.
Yeah, definitely. Or water.
Water, yeah, that's the safest. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining Philip today. The next discussion is on Jessie from the Bookish Mums channel with Beautifully Bookish Bethany, and it is To Kill the Queen, I believe. So if you have read that or are interested in reading it, then that will be in January. And thank you everyone today for joining to discuss American Gods, and see you all soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.